My daughter-in-law had been in a coma for 3 months after a devastating car accident. During one of my visits to the hospital, my grandson approached me with tears in his eyes and whispered, "Grandma, I don't think Mom is really sick. I saw something terrible on the security cameras." Confused and heartbroken, I replied, "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" Then he showed me his tablet, and what I saw made my blood freeze. The screen revealed my daughter-in-law walking around her hospital room in the middle of the night, completely conscious, meeting secretly with someone in a white coat. What we discovered next would expose the most sinister medical conspiracy our family had ever encountered. The scent of warm cinnamon rolls and freshly baked sourdough still lingered on my apron as I secured my vintage motorcycle outside Rosa's Corner Bakery. It had been an exhausting morning, customers flowing in and out without pause, each drawn by the aroma of my grandmother's secret recipes that had built this neighborhood institution over 40 years. Every day brought me small joys, arranging the golden pastries in perfect rows, listening to the elderly couples share stories over coffee, watching children press their faces against the display case. But all I truly wanted in that moment was to reach Lincoln Elementary School in time for Tommy, my precious 8-year-old grandson. Tommy was the sunshine of my life, always bursting with stories about his classmates, his eyes sparkling as he described every detail of his day. Just thinking about his infectious smile made all my aches and exhaustion disappear like morning mist. I had just fastened my helmet, ready to kickstart the engine, when my phone erupted with an urgent, jarring ring. The number was unfamiliar, but something about its persistence made my stomach clench with dread. "Are you Mrs. Catherine Morrison? This is Mercy General Hospital. Your daughter-in-law, Jessica Morrison, has been involved in a catastrophic vehicle collision. She's being rushed into emergency surgery as we speak." The world around me seemed to tilt sideways. The motorcycle wobbled beneath me as my hands went numb. I gripped the handlebars so tightly my knuckles turned white, feeling as though all the blood had drained from my body in an instant. My heart hammered against my ribs with such violence that it drowned out every sound on the busy street. Jessica, my beloved daughter-in-law whom I had cherished, like my own flesh and blood, in a life-threatening accident. The words echoed endlessly in my skull, but I couldn't grasp their full meaning. I only knew that every second I delayed could be precious time lost. I frantically dialed my son David's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He must already be racing to the hospital, I told myself, though panic was consuming my ability to think rationally. I wanted to speed directly to Mercy General, but suddenly Tommy's innocent face flashed in my mind. The boy would be waiting by the school gates, searching for my familiar motorcycle, counting on me to keep our daily routine. I couldn't abandon him, and I couldn't let him discover this devastating news from a stranger. With my heart threatening to explode, I navigated through Chicago's merciless afternoon traffic. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow-moving car became an insurmountable obstacle. Every passing second felt like another nail in a coffin, as terrifying images of twisted metal and broken glass flooded my imagination. How badly was Jessica hurt? Was she conscious? Was she fighting for her life at this very moment? When I finally reached the school, I spotted Tommy waiting beneath the old oak tree, clutching his Pokemon backpack. His face immediately brightened when he saw me approaching, his eyes twinkling with whatever adventure he was eager to share. But I couldn't bear to let him finish his excited greeting. "Tommy, climb on right now," I said, my voice hoarse and trembling. "Your mother was in a serious car accident. We need to get to the hospital immediately." I watched his radiant smile vanish instantly, like a light being extinguished. He didn't ask questions or protest. He simply climbed onto the bike in stunned silence, his small arms wrapping around my waist with desperate tightness. Throughout our frantic ride to the hospital, he remained completely mute, but I could feel his terror in the way he clung to me, as if afraid I might disappear too. Mercy General Hospital loomed before us like a fortress of despair, a towering concrete monument that reeked of disinfectant and human suffering. I guided Tommy through the maze of sterile corridors, my footsteps echoing ominously in the harsh fluorescent lighting. When we reached the trauma ward, I discovered David standing like a lost soul, his typically immaculate business suit now wrinkled and stained with dark, unmistakable bloodstains. Seeing my strong, confident son reduced to this broken shell nearly destroyed me. David had always been my rock, the man who could handle any crisis with calm determination. Now he looked like a frightened child who had lost everything that mattered. When David saw us approaching, he collapsed into my arms, sobbing with raw, uncontrolled anguish. "Mom, the doctor said Jessica's injuries are critical. They don't know if she'll ever wake up." His voice cracked with each word, as though his soul was being torn apart. I held him tightly while trying to remain strong, but my own body was trembling violently. Tommy, witnessing his father's complete breakdown, burst into heartbroken wails, his childish voice crying out, "Mommy," with desperate confusion. The boy grabbed onto David's legs, his wide eyes filled with terror, as if afraid of being abandoned by everyone he loved. In that moment of absolute chaos, I knelt down and pulled Tommy against my chest, trying to shield him from the full force of this nightmare. But how could I protect him when I myself was drowning in helplessness? The three of us huddled together on those unforgiving plastic chairs in the hospital corridor. Time seemed frozen in place. The clinical smell of bleach and antiseptic burned our nostrils. The impersonal announcements over the intercom sounded like death sentences. Every noise felt like a knife cutting deeper into our hearts. I stared at David's hollow eyes, then at Tommy's tear-stained face, then at the forbidding doors of the intensive care unit. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to do anything that might change this reality, but all I could do was sit there, completely powerless, waiting for news that might shatter what remained of our world. After what felt like a lifetime, but was actually 4 agonizing hours, those dreaded doors finally opened. A tall, distinguished man emerged, introducing himself as Dr. Richard Blackwood, Chief of Neurosurgery. His expression was grave, and he spoke with the measured precision of someone accustomed to delivering devastating news. The patient suffered massive traumatic brain injuries in the collision. The damage was so severe that she has fallen into what we call a profound comatose state. We've done everything medically possible, but her recovery now depends entirely on factors beyond our control. Those clinical words hit me like a physical assault. Profound comatose state, factors beyond our control. The terminology swirled in my mind, but their meaning was horrifyingly clear. Jessica, the vibrant woman who lit up every room she entered, now lay somewhere between life and death, trapped in a darkness we couldn't reach. David's knees buckled. If I hadn't caught him, he would have collapsed to the floor. His eyes glazed over as though his entire universe had imploded. Tommy, sensing the gravity of the moment, trembled in my arms like a leaf in a hurricane. I embraced him fiercely, trying to hide my own tears, but they were already streaming down my face in unstoppable rivers. A compassionate nurse named Elena approached us with a clipboard of medical forms. "The family may view the patient through the observation window, but please maintain absolute silence," she said, in a voice barely above a whisper. I nodded mutely and led Tommy and David to the thick glass barrier. Through it, we could see Jessica lying motionless, surrounded by a terrifying web of tubes, wires, and monitoring equipment. Her face was deathly pale, drained of all the life and warmth I remembered. Her lips, which had always been quick with laughter and gentle words, were now silent and still, as if she had journeyed to some unreachable dimension. David pressed his forehead against the cold glass and cried out in anguish, "My love, please open your eyes. Please look at me just once." His heartbreaking plea echoed through the corridor, and several nurses hurried over to comfort him gently, but I knew that nothing could ease my son's torture in that moment. I stood there holding Tommy, feeling every fragile beat of his small heart against my chest. I wanted to offer words of comfort, but my throat had closed completely, making speech impossible. That evening, I practically had to drag Tommy away from the hospital. The boy was inconsolable, begging to stay with his mother through the night. But I couldn't subject him to that suffocating atmosphere of medical machinery and impending doom. I made promises we would return first thing in the morning, though I had no idea what tomorrow might bring. David refused to leave Jessica's side. He settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair in the hallway, his gaze fixed obsessively on her room's door. I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be strong and independent, and felt my heart fracture into pieces. But I knew I couldn't stay. Tommy needed me, the bakery required my attention, and our family depended on me to keep functioning when everything else was falling apart. In the days that followed that life-changing phone call, my modest home felt shrouded in an oppressive fog of grief and uncertainty. Each morning when I awakened, a crushing weight settled on my chest, making every breath a struggle. I had lived 64 years, witnessed deaths and divorces, survived my husband's passing 5 years earlier. But I had never experienced this level of helpless desperation. Jessica remained trapped in that hospital bed, as lifeless as a marble statue. David had essentially moved into Mercy General, transforming the waiting area into his new residence. Every day I found him planted in the same spot, staring at Jessica's door with bloodshot eyes that had lost all their former vitality. During daylight hours, David maintained his vigil like a devoted sentinel. He would sit motionless for hours, watching Jessica's room as though his unwavering attention alone could somehow coax her back to consciousness. But when darkness fell and visiting hours ended, David sought solace in alcohol. More than once I discovered him unconscious on a hospital bench, clutching an empty whiskey bottle, his body reeking of despair and bourbon. One particularly painful evening, I arrived early for visiting hours and found David passed out in the corridor, an empty vodka bottle rolling across the linoleum floor. A young orderly approached cautiously and whispered, "Mrs. Morrison, your son really shouldn't be drinking like this. It's affecting other patients and families." I could only nod in shame, swallowing the lump in my throat. Inside, I felt like I was suffocating. Every morning, I rose at 3 o'clock to prepare David's favorite foods: warm cinnamon bread, hearty chicken soup, chocolate chip cookies that had comforted him since childhood. I wrapped everything carefully and brought it to the hospital, praying that familiar aromas might awaken some spark of life in him. But the routine was always the same. David would take 1 or 2 mechanical bites before pushing the food away, his attention immediately returning to Jessica's door. "Mom, I can't eat," he would mumble in a voice devoid of all emotion. "Nothing tastes like anything anymore." I would watch him with breaking heart, wanting to shake him, to scream that he had to live for Tommy's sake, for his own sake. Instead, I silently collected the untouched plates and carried them home, feeling more defeated each time. The burden of holding our family together now rested entirely on my aging shoulders. At 64, every joint ached when I woke up. Every muscle protested the day's demands, but I couldn't stop moving. Rosa's Corner Bakery was our only source of income, and without it, we would lose everything. Each morning at 3:30, while the rest of Chicago slept, I was already mixing dough and heating ovens. The familiar routine of baking had once brought me joy, but now it only reminded me of the peaceful life we had lost. During business hours, I managed the shop while constantly checking my watch, then racing to collect Tommy from school, then rushing to the hospital for evening visits. Some days the customer volume was so overwhelming that I could barely catch my breath. But I still forced myself to smile at every patron, even though all I wanted was to collapse in exhaustion. Tommy, my precious grandson, had undergone a complete personality transformation. The boy who once bounced with infectious energy and endless stories had become quiet and withdrawn. Every afternoon after school, I would find him sitting alone on a bench, clutching his backpack tightly, his young eyes vacant and lost. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, approached me one day with obvious concern. "Mrs. Morrison, Tommy has been exhibiting very troubling behavior lately. He refuses to participate in activities, doesn't interact with other children, and often just sits staring out the window. Is there something happening at home we should know about?" I forced a reassuring smile while dying inside. "He's just dealing with some family stress. Children process grief differently than adults." But Mrs. Patterson's expression remained worried. "Tommy also keeps asking me when his mother is coming back from her long sleep. He seems confused about whether she's actually sick or just resting. Has anyone explained the situation to him clearly?" That question haunted me for days. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his mother might never wake up? How do you help a child understand that sometimes people get hurt so badly that they can't come home? Every afternoon, I brought Tommy to the hospital to visit Jessica. It had become part of our painful routine, a fragment of hope in our otherwise hopeless days. Tommy would bring drawings from school, pictures of stick figures representing our family at the beach, at the park, celebrating birthdays. He would tape them against the glass window and whisper to his unconscious mother, "Mommy, Today I drew us all together at the zoo. See? That's you and Daddy and Grandma and me feeding the elephants. The teacher said it was really good. Wake up soon so we can go to the real zoo, okay? His voice would tremble as he spoke, as if he was trying to hold on to a dream that kept slipping away. I would stand beside him, listening to every hopeful word with my heart breaking into smaller pieces. Jessica never responded, never showed the slightest sign that she could hear his desperate pleas. David would often lift Tommy into his arms, his voice choked with tears. Your mommy can hear you, buddy. She's going to get better real soon. But inevitably, David would end up sobbing, and Tommy, witnessing his father's despair, would cry too. I had to repeatedly rescue Tommy from these emotional scenes, leading him away from the room even though I was crumbling inside. Our private family tragedy had become neighborhood gossip fodder. One day at the grocery store, Mrs. Henderson from 3 blocks over pulled me aside with undisguised curiosity. Catherine, I haven't seen Jessica around lately, and David looks terrible every time I spot him. What exactly happened? Is there something you're not telling people? I hesitated, trying to maintain my composure. Jessica was in a serious car accident. She's in the hospital. But Mrs. Henderson's probing stare and the whispered conversations of other shoppers made me want to disappear entirely. I clutched my basket and practically fled the store, but I could still hear their speculative murmurs following me like accusations. That night, David stumbled home reeking of alcohol and prescription medication. He looked at me with glazed, unfocused eyes and shouted, "Don't tell anyone about Jessica's condition. I don't want their pity or their gossip." His voice was harsh with pain and rage, but I knew that behind his anger was a grief too profound for words. I simply nodded silently and watched him stagger upstairs to his room. Tommy had been sitting on the staircase, his innocent eyes tracking his father's unsteady movements. He didn't say anything, just walked sadly to his bedroom, hugging his stuffed dinosaur tightly. Seeing him like that made me want to gather him in my arms, but I knew that nothing could shield him from this nightmare. That night, I remained alone in the cold kitchen, surrounded by a mountain of unpaid bills that seemed to multiply daily. Jessica's astronomical medical expenses, Tommy's school fees, the bakery's operating costs, our mortgage payments. Every number felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. I had worked my entire adult life to build financial security for my family, and now I watched it all crumbling like a house of cards. 3 months into Jessica's coma, something changed in ways I couldn't yet understand. That afternoon, Chicago's autumn sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows. I had just finished the lunch rush at the bakery, locked the doors, and collected Tommy from school for our daily hospital visit. The boy sat silently in the back seat of my old Honda, staring out the window without speaking. I tried to make conversation, but my throat constricted every time I looked at his sad, confused expression. Mercy General Hospital appeared before us with its familiar, oppressive atmosphere. The corridors still reeked of disinfectant and despair. The overhead announcements still sounded like pronouncements of doom. David was slumped in his usual plastic chair, dozing fitfully from sheer exhaustion. At his feet, several empty energy drink cans and pill bottles were scattered, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Seeing my son in this deteriorated state broke my heart anew. David had once been vibrant, ambitious, always quick with a joke or an encouraging word. Now he was merely a ghost haunting these sterile hallways, sustained only by caffeine, alcohol, and whatever medications he'd been prescribed for anxiety and insomnia. I motioned for Tommy to remain quiet. I didn't want to wake his father in this condition. The boy nodded with understanding beyond his years and followed me slowly toward Jessica's observation window. We approached the thick glass barrier that separated us from Jessica's room. She lay there exactly as she had for 3 months, pale, motionless, connected to a maze of life support equipment. The steady beeping of monitors provided a metronome of medical machinery, a cruel reminder that she existed somewhere between life and death. Her face showed no trace of consciousness. Her lips remained sealed as if guarding secrets from another world. I gazed at her with familiar heartbreak, wondering for the 1,000th time if she could somehow sense our presence, if she was fighting to return to us from whatever dark place held her captive. I was preparing to take Tommy's hand and lead him away from this suffocating scene when suddenly he tugged insistently at my coat sleeve. He stretched up on his tiptoes, pressed his mouth close to my ear, and whispered words that would change everything. "Grandma, I don't think Mom is really sick. I think she's pretending." The words hit me like a lightning bolt. I spun around to stare directly into Tommy's transparent, honest eyes, struggling to keep my voice calm despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Tommy, that's a terrible thing to say. Your mother is very seriously ill. You've seen the doctors, the machines, the treatments." But Tommy didn't argue or backtrack as children usually do when corrected. Instead, he lowered his head and pulled out a small tablet device, an old iPad David had given him to watch educational videos during their long hospital stays. "Look at this." "Grandma," he said in a voice so low I had to strain to hear him. "I recorded it myself." The screen flickered to life, displaying the familiar interior of Jessica's room. The timestamp showed it was taken at 2:17 a.m. the previous night. In the video, Jessica lay in her bed exactly as we always saw her, surrounded by tubes and wires, completely still. But then something impossible happened. Jessica slowly opened her eyes. She looked around carefully, as if checking to ensure she was alone. Then she sat up with fluid, natural movements, stretched her arms above her head, and reached for the water glass on her bedside table. She drank deeply, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and lay back down. She closed her eyes and resumed the exact position we always found her in, motionless, unconscious, comatose. The video lasted only 90 seconds, but those 90 seconds shattered everything I thought I knew about reality. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as the room seemed to spin around me. This wasn't a woman trapped in a coma. This was someone deliberately deceiving us. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs too weak to support me, nearly dropping the tablet from my nerveless fingers. Tommy stood beside me, his voice trembling with fear and confusion. "I've seen her do this lots of times, Grandma. Every night when Daddy falls asleep in the chair, I sneak over to watch through the window. Mom opens her eyes and looks around. Sometimes she even gets up and walks to the bathroom. But whenever you or Daddy come back, she pretends to be asleep again." Hearing these words from my innocent grandson sent ice water through my veins. Tommy's whispered revelation, combined with that devastating video, was like a lightning strike that illuminated a landscape I hadn't known existed. Jessica, my daughter-in-law whom I had loved and trusted like my own child, was lying to us. But why? For what purpose? What could possibly motivate someone to put their family through this agonizing ordeal? I quickly shoved the tablet into my purse, trying to steady my voice despite the chaos in my mind. "Tommy, you absolutely cannot tell your father about this. Do you understand me? This must be our secret for now." The boy nodded solemnly, his eyes wide with fear and bewilderment. I knew he didn't fully comprehend what was happening, but he sensed the enormous gravity of the situation. At that moment, David stirred and awakened from his restless sleep. He rubbed his bloodshot eyes and looked at us with confusion. "What are you two whispering about over there?" My heart leaped into my throat. I shook my head frantically and diverted his attention. "Nothing important. I was just reminding Tommy about his homework assignments." David nodded wearily, then pulled his son into his arms and whispered with heartbreaking sincerity, "Don't worry, buddy. Your mom is going to wake up soon. The doctor said her brain is just taking time to heal." Tommy avoided his father's gaze, staring down at his shoes instead. Seeing him carry this terrible burden, keeping such a devastating secret from his own father, made my chest feel like it was being crushed in a vice. During our drive home, I operated on autopilot, my mind spinning with horrific possibilities. The images from Tommy's video replayed endlessly. Jessica sitting up, drinking water, moving with perfect coordination. Her face had shown complete awareness, not the blank confusion of someone emerging from unconsciousness. This wasn't a medical miracle or a momentary awakening. This was calculated deception, but the questions were overwhelming. If Jessica was faking her coma, why? What did she hope to gain from torturing her family like this? How long had this charade been going on? And most terrifyingly, who else was involved? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with theories and fears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessica's face in that video. Alert, purposeful, completely conscious. The woman I had trusted and loved for 8 years had been lying to us with surgical precision. I realized I needed help, professional help from someone with experience in uncovering deception. I couldn't handle this alone, and I couldn't risk making accusations without absolute proof. The next morning, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I called Detective Maria Santos, a private investigator who had helped our family years earlier, when David's business partner had embezzled money from their construction company. Maria was thorough, discreet, and had a reputation for uncovering truths that people desperately wanted to keep hidden. "Mrs. Morrison, it's good to hear from you," Maria said when I reached her office. "Though you sound troubled, what can I do for you?" I took a deep breath and explained everything. Tommy's innocent observation, the tablet video, my growing suspicions about Jessica's supposed coma. Maria listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to pour out my fears and confusion. When I finished, Maria was quiet for several long moments. Finally, she spoke with the careful precision I remembered from our previous interaction. "Mrs. Morrison, what you're describing suggests a sophisticated deception involving medical fraud. If your suspicions are correct, we're not just talking about one person lying. We're talking about a conspiracy that would require multiple participants, including medical professionals." My blood ran cold. "You think someone at the hospital is helping her?" "It's possible. Faking a coma convincingly for 3 months would require inside knowledge of medical procedures, access to patient records, and the ability to manipulate test results. We need to investigate this carefully and gather substantial evidence before making any accusations." Maria agreed to take the case immediately. We arranged for her to begin surveillance at Mercy General that very night, using sophisticated recording equipment that could document Jessica's activities without detection. "Mrs. Morrison, I need you to promise me something," Maria said as our meeting concluded. "You cannot tell your son about this investigation until we have concrete proof. If Jessica is indeed deceiving your family, revealing our suspicions prematurely could cause her to change her methods or disappear entirely." I nodded, though the thought of keeping this secret from David made my stomach churn. But I knew Maria was right. David was barely functional as it was. Learning that his wife might be deliberately torturing him could push him over the edge entirely. That evening at the hospital, I watched David hold Jessica's limp hand while whispering words of love and encouragement. I observed Tommy carefully taping another drawing to the window, this one showing their family at Christmas, with Jessica opening presents and smiling. The innocence in my grandson's gesture, contrasted with the terrible knowledge I now carried, made me feel like I was suffocating. If Jessica was truly conscious, she could hear every word of David's desperate pleas. She could see Tommy's artwork and his tears. She was witnessing the destruction of her own family and choosing to continue the charade. What kind of person could be so cruel? Over the following week, Maria's surveillance revealed evidence that exceeded even my worst fears. The first video showed Jessica leaving her hospital room at 1:30 a.m., dressed in street clothes that someone had smuggled to her. She walked with perfect coordination to the hospital's parking garage, where she met with a man I didn't recognize, someone in an expensive suit who embraced her intimately. The second video captured Jessica in what appeared to be the hospital director's office at 3 a.m., engaged in intense conversation with Dr. Blackwood himself. They were reviewing documents together, and at one point, Jessica counted a thick stack of cash before putting it in her purse. The third video was the most damning of all. It showed Jessica in the hospital chapel, kneeling before the altar, but instead of praying, she was speaking on a cell phone. Maria's equipment had captured her voice clearly. "Everything is going perfectly. David is completely destroyed, just like we planned. The insurance money should be available within another month, and then we can finalize everything." I watched these videos in Maria's office, feeling my entire world collapse around me. This wasn't just medical fraud. This was a calculated plot to destroy my son and steal money that belonged to our family. "Mrs. Morrison, we need to expand our investigation," Maria said grimly. "Jessica isn't working alone. We need to identify everyone involved in this conspiracy and understand their ultimate goal. Their ultimate goal? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Based on what we've observed, I suspect this involves insurance fraud, identity theft, and possibly even plans for Jessica to disappear entirely with a new identity. The man she met in the parking garage could be helping her establish a new life somewhere else. The implications hit me like physical blows. Jessica wasn't just deceiving us. She was planning to vanish, leaving David to raise Tommy alone while she lived comfortably on stolen insurance money. There's something else, Maria continued. We ran a background check on Jessica, and we found some disturbing inconsistencies. Her previous address, her employment history, even her social security number. Several details don't match official records. What are you saying? I'm saying that the woman your son married might not be who she claims to be. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had grown cold hours earlier, staring at printed copies of Maria's evidence. Every photograph was like a dagger to my heart. Jessica laughing with her mysterious accomplice. Jessica counting money in Dr. Blackwood's office. Jessica speaking casually on the phone while her husband and son suffered in agony. I thought about all the years I had welcomed her into our family. The Christmas mornings when she had helped me prepare elaborate breakfasts. The summer evenings when we had all sat on the porch sharing stories and planning future vacations. The way she had cried when I told her stories about David's childhood, claiming she was so grateful to be part of our family. Had it all been performance? Had she been planning this betrayal from the very beginning? The next morning brought a new level of horror I hadn't anticipated. I was opening the bakery for the day when 3 men in dark suits approached. They identified themselves as federal agents, FBI investigators specializing in medical fraud and insurance crimes. Mrs. Morrison, we've been monitoring suspicious activity at Mercy General Hospital for several months, Agent Johnson explained. Our investigation has identified your daughter-in-law as a person of interest in a complex fraud scheme that involves multiple victims across several states. My knees nearly buckled. Multiple victims? Jessica Morrison, or rather the woman using that identity, has been involved in at least 4 similar schemes in different cities. She targets vulnerable men, typically widowers or divorcees with children, establishes relationships with them, and then stages elaborate medical emergencies to collect insurance money and donations from sympathetic communities. Agent Rodriguez added, the scheme usually involves cooperation from corrupt medical professionals who falsify records and test results in exchange for substantial payments. Dr. Blackwood has been under investigation for healthcare fraud for over a year. I sank into one of the bakery's chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Jessica's deception. How long has this been going on? Based on our research, the woman your son knows as Jessica Morrison has been operating similar scams for at least 8 years. Her real name is Michelle Torres, and she has outstanding warrants in 3 states for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. The agents explained that they had been building a case against the entire network, but needed additional evidence to ensure successful prosecutions. They asked if I would be willing to cooperate with their investigation by allowing them to install monitoring equipment in the hospital and potentially participating in a controlled operation to expose the conspiracy. We understand this is devastating news for your family, Agent Johnson said with genuine sympathy, but your cooperation could prevent other families from experiencing what you've gone through. I agreed immediately. If helping the FBI could protect other innocent people from this nightmare, I would do whatever was necessary. That afternoon, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I knew I had to tell David the truth, even though it might destroy him. I found him in his usual spot at the hospital, looking more haggard than ever. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair unwashed, his eyes red with exhaustion and medication. The sight of him broke my heart, but I knew that continuing to let him live in this deception would be even more cruel. David, we need to talk, I said, sitting beside him in the corridor. I have something very important to tell you about Jessica. He looked at me with confusion and irritation. Mom, not now. I'm waiting for the doctor to update me on her condition. David, there won't be any updates on her condition because Jessica isn't in a coma. The words hung in the air between us like an unexploded bomb. David stared at me as though I had lost my mind. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him Tommy's original video. then Maria's surveillance footage, then the FBI's evidence photos. With each piece of proof, I watched David's face transform from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror when the final video finished playing, the recording of Jessica laughing with her accomplice in the parking garage. David's hands began to shake. Uncontrollably. "This can't be real," he whispered. "Jessica loves me. She loves Tommy. She would never—" "David, her real name is Michelle Torres. She's wanted by the FBI for running the same scam in multiple states. You're not her first victim, and if we don't stop her, you won't be her last." I showed him the federal agent's documentation, the background checks, the evidence of her previous schemes. With each revelation, David seemed to shrink into himself, as though his entire identity was dissolving. Finally, he stood up abruptly and walked to Jessica's window. He stared at her motionless form for several minutes, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When he turned back to me, his eyes held a devastation I had never seen before. "She's been awake this whole time? She's been watching me fall apart and just letting it happen?" "Yes. And Tommy? She's been letting our son suffer, letting him think his mother was dying?" "Yes." David slammed his fist against the wall so hard that several nurses looked over with concern. How could someone be so evil? How could I have been such a fool? I stood and embraced my broken son, feeling his body convulse with grief and rage. "You weren't a fool, David. You were a loving husband who trusted his wife. She's the one who chose to betray that trust." "What do we do now, Mom?" "We help the FBI catch her and everyone involved in this scheme. And then we focus on healing our family." That night, Agent Johnson explained the FBI's plan to expose Jessica's deception and arrest everyone involved in the conspiracy. They had scheduled a coordinated operation for the following morning that would simultaneously apprehend Jessica, Dr. Blackwood, and several other hospital employees who had been taking bribes to falsify medical records. "We'll need David to be present during the arrests," Agent Rodriguez explained. "Jessica will likely try to maintain her deception even when confronted with evidence, so having her husband there will make it harder for her to deny the charges." David nodded grimly. "I want to see her face when she realizes her game is over." The next morning,